I never imagined my life would unravel like this. My name is Ethan, and for the past 6 years, I've been married to the love of my life, Julia. At least, that's what I believed. Our life was modest but filled with laughter, shared dreams, and mutual respect, or so I thought. Julia worked as a bartender at an upscale club downtown. It was a job she loved. The energy of the place matched her vibrant personality. She thrived on the nightly interactions, the fast pace, and the music that seemed to pulsate through the walls. It didn't bother me, at first. I had complete trust in her. The late nights, the glittering dresses, and the occasional free drink she'd bring home were just part of her world. But over time, the little things began to chip away at that trust. I noticed her shifts grew longer, her phone constantly buzzed with messages, and she'd started dressing differently, more daring, more provocative. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that bartending was her escape, her art. But deep down, a whisper of doubt had started to grow louder. One night, as we sat on our worn leather couch, watching a show neither of us was paying attention to, she received a text. Her expression changed, just for a second, but I caught it. It was the kind of look you'd give when you see something you want but know you shouldn't have. When I asked who it was, she laughed it off, saying it was just a work thing. I let it go, not wanting to seem paranoid. But that whisper turned into a murmur. The final straw came when she started working every Saturday night, a shift she once avoided so we could spend weekends together. More tips, she explained. The weekend crowd is generous. I believed her because I wanted to, but every extra hour she spent away felt like a piece of our bond fraying at the edges. Then, one Saturday, I decided to surprise her. It wasn't like me to show up unannounced, but I wanted to see her in her element, remind myself why I fell for her spark. I dressed casually, stepped into the neon-lit club, and scanned the room for her. There she was, standing behind the bar, laughing at something a man said. He leaned in too close, his hand brushing hers as she poured his drink. Her smile was radiant, but it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to someone else. For the first time, I felt the weight of betrayal settle in my chest. I left before she could see me, walking back to my car in a daze. The murmur had become a roar. My trust, once unwavering, was shattered. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure. And so began my quiet descent into the truth, a path that would change everything. After that night at the club, my world felt off-kilter, like I was walking on a tightrope, unsure of what was real anymore. I couldn't shake the image of Julia laughing with that man, her hand brushing his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Was I overreacting? Was I seeing something that wasn't there? The questions circled in my head, relentless and unanswerable. But the changes in her behavior became harder to ignore. Julia started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse. We were slammed at work, or I stayed behind to help clean up. Once or twice, I caught her slipping into the bathroom with her phone after arriving home, her voice low as she whispered into it. When I asked who it was, she said it was a work call, something about the schedule. I hated the way it made me feel, distrustful, suspicious. It wasn't who I was. But then there were the little things. The lingering scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine, a lipstick shade I'd never seen her wear before, and the way she seemed to avoid my gaze when I asked about her day. One Friday evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. As she prepared for her shift, I casually said, "I've been thinking about visiting you at the club more often. It looks like a fun place." Her reaction was telling. Her hand froze mid-air as she reached for her earrings, and her tone turned defensive. "You don't need to do that," she said, laughing nervously. "It's just work. It's boring. You wouldn't enjoy it." "I'd like to see where you spend so much time," I pressed. "And besides, I might keep some of those drunk guys in check." She forced a smile, but I could see the unease beneath it. "You don't have to worry about that. I can handle myself." I didn't push further, but her reaction only confirmed what I already feared. Something wasn't right. The next day, I called in a favor from my friend Max. He worked in IT and owed me for helping him move a few months back. When I explained what was going on, he hesitated. "Ethan, are you sure you want to go down this road? You might not like what you find." "I need to know," I said firmly. With a sigh, he agreed to help. Over the next few days, Max worked his magic, digging into phone records and social media. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. My need for the truth was stronger than my guilt. When Max finally called me, his voice was serious. "Ethan, I found something." He sent me screenshots of text exchanges between Julia and an unknown number saved as C. The messages were explicit, flirtatious, full of promises to meet up after work. My stomach churned as I scrolled through them, each line feeling like a knife to my chest. One message stood out: "Meet me in the VIP lounge after your shift. Can't wait to see you." I clenched my fists, my mind racing. The VIP lounge. That's where she was spending her extra time after work. With him. That night, as Julia left for her shift, I made my decision. I was going to the club. I didn't care if she saw me or if I caused a scene. I had to see for myself. When I arrived, the bouncer waved me in, recognizing me from my last visit. The club was packed, the music a relentless thrum in my chest. I pushed through the crowd, making my way to the bar where Julia worked. But she wasn't there. "Where's Julia?" I asked one of her co-workers, a younger girl with dyed purple hair. She hesitated before answering, her eyes darting to the VIP section. "She's taking care of some regulars," she said vaguely, before turning back to her work. I felt a cold dread settle over me as I made my way toward the VIP area. A security guard stopped me at the entrance, but I slipped him a $50, and he stepped aside without a word. The lounge was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and perfume. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, and then I saw her. She was sitting on a plush couch, her hand resting on the thigh of a man I didn't recognize. He leaned in close, whispering something that made her laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard in months. It was carefree, intimate, the kind of laugh that used to be meant for me. I wanted to storm over, to demand answers, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as they leaned closer, their faces inches apart. In that moment, something inside me broke. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. She was betraying me, and she didn't even care enough to hide it. I turned and left before I could do something I'd regret. But as I walked out into the cool night air, one thought consumed me. She needed to know I wasn't a fool, and she needed to pay. The drive home felt like a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was a storm of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted Julia to feel the weight of what she had done. She had turned our life, our love, into a joke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, replaying the scene in the VIP lounge over and over. I thought about her laugh, the way she leaned into him like they were the only two people in the world. The image burned in my mind, fueling my resolve. When she came home after her shift, I was waiting for her in the living room. The clock read 2:17 a.m. She walked in, humming softly to herself, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw me sitting there, the living room bathed in the faint glow of the TV. "Ethan, what are you doing up?" she asked, her voice laced with unease. I didn't answer right away. I stared at her, my eyes searching for a hint of guilt, some sign that she knew what she had done. But her face remained carefully neutral. "Busy night at work?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway like she wanted to escape. "Yeah, same as usual." "Why?" I stood, my movements slow and deliberate. "Don't lie to me, Julia. I know where you were." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction. "What are you talking about?" "The VIP lounge," I said, my voice rising. "I saw you, Julia. I saw you with him." Her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Don't you dare," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare insult me by pretending this is nothing. I saw you. I saw how you looked at him, how you laughed with him. How long, Julia? How long have you been lying to me?" Her hands trembled as she set her purse down on the table. "It's complicated," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Complicated? I echoed, my anger boiling over. What's complicated about betraying your husband? About throwing away everything we've built for? What? For some guy at the club? She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. It's not like that, Ethan. He's just someone I talk to. Someone who understands me. Her words hit me like a slap. Someone who understands you? I repeated, my voice breaking. And I don't? Is that it? I've been here, Julia, through everything. I've supported you, loved you, trusted you. And this is how you repay me? She flinched at the raw emotion in my voice, but said nothing. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. It was confirmation. She didn't deny it. She didn't fight for us. Why, Julia? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. Why did you do it? Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I don't know, she said finally. I guess. I just felt like something was missing. Like I wasn't enough. Her words gutted me. So instead of talking to me, you turn to someone else. Do you even realize what you've done to me? To us? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've succeeded. Julia tried to explain herself further, but I couldn't listen anymore. I told her to sleep in the guest room and left the house, needing air, needing space. I drove aimlessly for hours, the streets empty under the glow of streetlights. By the time I returned home, the sun was rising. Julia was asleep in the guest room, her face streaked with dried tears. I stood in the doorway, staring at her, feeling a mix of love, anger, and heartbreak. This woman was my wife, the person I had vowed to spend my life with. And now, she was a stranger. I didn't wake her. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and started planning. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to be the victim. If Julia thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, she was wrong. I was going to take control, and I was going to make sure she understood what it felt like to lose everything. The next morning, the house was eerily silent. Julia stayed in the guest room, and I avoided her. My thoughts were focused, every emotion channeled into planning my next move. I wasn't going to lash out or confront her again. Not yet. If this was going to end, it would be on my terms. The first step was to understand everything. If there was one thing I had learned, it was that knowledge was power. I spent hours combing through bank statements, phone records, and even Julia's social media. Her patterns, her connections, everything became a puzzle I was determined to solve. What I found only solidified my resolve. There were payments made to a hotel downtown, small enough not to raise suspicion but frequent enough to catch my attention. There were late-night calls and texts to the same number saved under a fake name, Carla, in her phone. And then, there were pictures. Pictures she must have forgotten to delete from her cloud storage. Selfies with him, candid moments of them together, her smile brighter than it had been with me in years. It hurt. God, it hurt more than I thought it would. But the pain fueled me. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to fight back. That afternoon, Julia finally emerged from the guest room. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red and puffy. Ethan, she began, her voice tentative, can we talk? I didn't even look up from my laptop. I don't think there's anything left to say. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. I made a mistake. A mistake? I snapped, slamming my laptop shut and finally meeting her gaze. Sleeping with another man is a mistake? No, Julia. It's a choice. A choice you made over and over again. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, Ethan, I want to fix this. I love you. I stood abruptly, cutting her off. Love? You don't get to use that word. Not anymore. The rawness of my voice seemed to silence her. She stood there, staring at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than guilt in her eyes. I saw fear. I'm not going to fight with you, Julia, I said, my voice steady now. But things are going to change. You've made your choices. Now it's my turn. Without waiting for her response, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I drove to my lawyer's office. It was a small, nondescript building, but I had heard good things about the man inside. When I explained my situation to him, he listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. "You're not the first, and sadly, you won't be the last," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The good news is, you've been smart about this. The photos, the messages, the financial records, all of it is solid evidence. If you want to pursue divorce, you're in a strong position." "I don't just want a divorce," I said, my voice firm. "I want her to feel what I've felt. I want her to understand what it means to lose everything." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I can't advise anything outside the law, but if you want to make her regret her choices, there are ways to protect yourself while making it clear that you're not someone to be crossed." Over the next few days, I began putting my plan into motion. I opened a separate bank account, transferring my savings into it to ensure Julia couldn't access the money. I spoke to our mutual friends, subtly letting slip that our marriage was on the rocks. I wasn't vindictive, but I wanted the truth to be out there. No more secrets. I also started gathering every piece of evidence I had: photos, messages, hotel receipts, compiling them into a folder I labeled "The End." It was a painful process, but it also felt empowering. For once, I wasn't the one being blindsided. Julia tried to talk to me several times, but I kept my distance. She apologized, cried, and begged, but I refused to engage. She had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. The tipping point came on a Friday evening. Julia had gone out again. Whether to work or to see him, I didn't care anymore. I used the opportunity to pack a bag and leave the house. I didn't tell her where I was going, and I didn't plan to come back until I was ready. I checked into a hotel across town, needing space to think. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. Julia had taken so much from me, but I still had one thing left: my strength. And I wasn't going to let her take that too. Staying in that hotel room was both a reprieve and a burden. The silence gave me room to think, but it also left space for memories, both the good and the bad. I thought about the woman Julia used to be, her laugh that lit up a room, the way she used to make me feel like the most important person in her world. I missed that version of her, but I also knew she was gone. By the second day, I stopped waiting for a call or text from her. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to fight for me or just stay silent. Either way, I realized, my life was moving in a new direction. What I needed now was clarity, and that came from action. I started by reaching out to people who mattered: friends, family. I told them the truth about what was happening. It was harder than I thought it would be, admitting that my marriage was falling apart, but their support was overwhelming. My sister, Claire, was especially furious. "Ethan, you don't deserve this," she said over the phone, her voice filled with indignation. "You've always been there for her. It's her loss." Hearing those words helped more than I expected. For so long, I had been blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth was, this wasn't my failure. It was hers. By the third day, I was ready to take the next step. My lawyer had advised me to gather as much evidence as possible before filing for divorce, and I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. I went back to the house while Julia was at work, methodically going through our shared life and separating what was mine from what was hers. In the bedroom, I found a shoebox tucked in the back of the closet. Inside were keepsakes, ticket stubs, old photos, and a bundle of letters. I hadn't seen them in years. As I sifted through them, a wave of nostalgia hit me. These were reminders of a time when we were happy, when our love had felt unshakable. But at the bottom of the box, I found something else, a small envelope labeled with my name. Inside was a letter she had written years ago, around the time we got married. Her handwriting was neat, each word carefully chosen. "Ethan, I know life won't always be easy, but I promise to stand by you through everything. I'll fight for us, for our love, because you're my home, my heart. Thank you for choosing me. I'll never take that for granted." I stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. That promise was a lie now. She had taken me for granted, betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, then tucked it into my pocket. It wasn't a token of love anymore. It was a reminder of what I had lost. As I continued packing, I found other signs of her betrayal. There were receipts for expensive dinners I hadn't been part of, lingerie I had never seen her wear, and a burner phone hidden in a drawer. It was almost laughable how careless she had been. I took photos of everything, documenting each piece of evidence. I wanted her to know that I wasn't blind to her actions anymore. When she finally came home, I would be ready. That evening, I sent Julia a text. "We need to talk. Be home by 8. She replied almost immediately. "I'll be there." For once, she kept her word. She walked through the door at exactly 8 o'clock, her face a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Ethan," she said softly, setting her purse down, "I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking a lot and—" I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it. I'm not interested in your excuses." She froze, her mouth snapping shut. "I've been cleaning out the house," I continued, my voice cold. "Found a lot of interesting things. Receipts, phone numbers, messages. You've been busy, haven't you?" Her face turned pale, and she stumbled over her words. "Ethan, I can explain." "I don't need your explanations," I snapped. "I know everything, Julia. Every lie, every betrayal. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine." Her tears came quickly, but I felt no sympathy. This wasn't a moment for forgiveness. This was the end. "I'm filing for divorce," I said bluntly. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I was done being the man who waited, who begged, who tried to fix what was broken. Julia had shattered our life, and now it was my turn to pick up the pieces, without her. "I loved you," I said, my voice heavy with finality, "but I can't love someone who doesn't respect me." Without waiting for her response, I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. For the first time in months, I felt free. Walking out of that house was both liberating and suffocating. The weight of my decision lifted, but in its place was a haunting sense of finality. The life Julia and I had built was officially over. There was no turning back, no more illusions to cling to. I stayed in the hotel that night, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing against me. I thought leaving her would bring peace, but instead, it felt like I was mourning a part of myself. Morning came too quickly. I forced myself out of bed and drove to my lawyer's office. He reviewed the evidence I had gathered, photos, receipts, the burner phone, and nodded with approval. "This is solid," he said. "You've done your homework. With this, you'll have the upper hand in the divorce proceedings. It's clear she's been unfaithful." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice heavy. "We'll file the paperwork immediately. Once she's served, the process begins. It could take a few months, but with this level of evidence, you're in a strong position." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. This was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier. That evening, I went to my sister Claire's house. She had been one of my biggest supporters throughout this ordeal, and I needed her presence to steady me. As soon as I walked in, she pulled me into a hug. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "It's going to be hard, but you're stronger than this, Ethan." Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the ache in my chest. "I just don't understand how she could do this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "How do you throw away years of love like that?" Claire sighed, leading me to the couch. "Some people don't know how to value what they have. It's not about you, Ethan. It's about her. She's the one who failed, not you." I nodded, even though it was hard to believe. The doubts still crept in, whispering that maybe I could have done more, been more. But Claire was right. This was Julia's betrayal, not mine. Over the next few days, life became a strange routine. I went to work, stayed at the hotel, and tried to move forward. But Julia's shadow lingered in everything. The scent of her perfume on my clothes, the memory of her laugh, the ghost of our shared dreams. They were all reminders of what I had lost. Then, one evening, as I sat in my hotel room scrolling through my phone, a message popped up from an unknown number. "Ethan, please talk to me. I miss you." It was Julia. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear her explanation, even if it was just more lies. But the stronger part of me knew better. I deleted the message without replying. She texted again the next day. Can we meet? Just to talk? I need to explain. This time, I blocked her number. A week later, I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. Ethan, she's been served, he said. You've taken the first step. Now it's up to her how this plays out. Thanks, I replied, though the weight of the moment didn't feel like a victory. It felt like another reminder of how much had been lost. That evening, I went for a long drive, ending up at the beach where Julia and I had once spent an anniversary. I sat on the sand, staring out at the waves, and allowed myself to feel the grief I had been pushing away. This wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the future I thought we had. The trust, the love, the dreams, they were all gone. And for the first time, I let myself cry. But as the tears fell, so did the weight on my chest. It was cathartic, a release of everything I had been holding in. By the time the sun set, I felt lighter, as if the ocean had carried away some of my pain. I realized then that this wasn't just the end. It was also a beginning. I had been broken, but I wasn't destroyed. I could rebuild, piece by piece, stronger than before. And if Julia thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. As the divorce process began, I found myself stepping back and watching Julia from a distance. Despite blocking her number, I still saw traces of her attempts to reach me. Messages through mutual friends, a handwritten note left at my office. She claimed she wanted to explain, to apologize, but I didn't trust her words anymore. Apologies wouldn't erase what she had done. I focused on my work, throwing myself into projects to keep my mind occupied. But every now and then, curiosity got the better of me. I checked her social media, saw her posts filled with vague sadness and carefully chosen quotes about regret and second chances. I didn't engage, but I couldn't look away. It was like watching someone try to rebuild a house on a crumbling foundation. One evening, I got a call from an unexpected source, Julia's coworker, Lisa. She sounded hesitant at first, but her words came quickly once she started. Ethan, I know it's not my place, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. Julia's been seeing this guy, Mark, for months. It started as flirting, but it became more. I thought you should know, in case you didn't already. Her confession wasn't news to me, but her next words caught me off guard. She's been talking about you at work, Lisa said. She regrets everything, Ethan. I don't know if it matters, but I thought you should hear it. I thanked her but didn't dwell on the call. Regret wasn't enough. It didn't change the choices Julia had made or the pain she had caused. Weeks turned into months, and the divorce proceedings progressed slowly. Julia's lawyer tried to argue for a larger share of our assets, claiming she had contributed equally to our life. My evidence of her infidelity countered their arguments, but it still felt like a battle at every turn. At one point, we had to sit in mediation together. It was the first time I had seen her in weeks, and the sight of her stirred emotions I thought I had buried. She looked tired, worn down, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. Ethan, she said quietly, when the mediator stepped out, I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I still love you. Her words twisted something inside me, but I forced myself to stay composed. Love isn't just a word, Julia. It's a choice, and you made yours. The rest of the session passed in tense silence. As the divorce neared its conclusion, I found myself focusing more on the future than the past. I moved into a new apartment, a small but comfortable place that felt like a fresh start. I began reconnecting with old friends, rediscovering parts of myself that had been lost in the haze of marriage. One night, Claire invited me to dinner, and I met her friend Mia. She was kind, funny, and completely unpretentious. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope for what life could be. Julia's affair with Mark hadn't ended, and whispers of their public arguments began to reach me. He wasn't the man she thought he was. His promises of a glamorous life were hollow, and their relationship was crumbling under the weight of its own lies. I couldn't deny the schadenfreude I felt when I heard about their breakup. It wasn't noble, but it was honest. Julia had chosen this path, and now she was reaping the consequences. The day of the final hearing arrived. I dressed sharply, determined to face Julia with the dignity she had stripped from me. She looked defeated, her once vibrant energy dulled. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me the majority of our shared assets and rejecting her requests for alimony. The evidence of her infidelity had been damning. As we left the courtroom, Julia approached me one last time. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find happiness." I didn't respond. I simply walked away, leaving her behind for good. Life after the divorce was quieter, simpler. I poured my energy into my career, hobbies, and new friendships. Mia and I began dating, taking things slow. She was patient with me, understanding the wounds I was still healing from. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living for myself. The scars from Julia's betrayal were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. Months later, I received a letter from Julia. In it, she apologized again, detailing her struggles and regrets. She wrote about how she had taken me for granted, how she realized too late what she had lost. She asked for forgiveness, not as a plea for reconciliation, but as a way to find peace. I didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But her letter didn't stir anger anymore. It was just a reminder of a chapter that had closed. Why true revenge wasn't in hurting Julia or exposing her to others. It was in moving forward. I built a life that was mine, free from her betrayal and lies. I found happiness in places I hadn't expected, with people who truly valued me. In the end, the best revenge wasn't making her pay. It was showing her, and myself, that I didn't need her to thrive. Julia had tried to break me, but she only made me stronger. And as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, I realized something profound. I had survived. I had won.